we need to highlight those things that are going on right now from our government towards its citizens. Our founding fathers understood this policy very well, this concept. They said, when the people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. I hear constantly from people in America right now that we fear the government. We fear the retribution. We fear that they're going to come in and take things from us, that they're listening to us at all times. Now, many would discard that as simply paranoia. Until now, an 83-year-old grandmother in Albuquerque, New Mexico, I've known her for the last 15 years since I got into political circles. She's probably the most joyful, ebullient person in all of politics because she's here for what comes in the heart, not for what it can do for her. You see, she's a naturalized citizen here, born in Indonesia, came here, ended up from 12 to 16 spending time in the Japanese internment camps because of her origin, not Japanese herself. So she has experienced a government that would become heavy-handed in a time of war. But the government that would become heavy-handed over political processes is completely different government than that during World War II. She helped establish the Children's Freedom Scholarship Fund, where she hands out patriotic coloring books to youngsters in the Albuquerque area. And because of these activities that got the attention of the IRS, they came in and audited and harassed this 83-year-old grandmother. I had an email before the scandal broke about one of my constituents in Socorro who said, "I was audited and we couldn't figure out why. I talked to my accountant. During the audit, we couldn't figure it out. There was no unusual question." He said, "But during the audit, I noticed a handwritten name across my file." He said, "I just made mental note of it." After an audit that asked nothing specific, the auditor asked, "Do you know?" And he read the name. The guy says, "Doesn't ring a bell to me." It did not. On the drive home, he said, "Wait a minute. That's that meeting I went to 3 years ago. That's the meeting where I said, I don't want to be a part of this group. They're interested in the Constitution and the debt." He said, "I know about all that stuff." He writes a small check, leaves, and never goes back. One meeting with the guy who later formed a Tea Party, wasn't even formed, causes an audit. When our government knows this kind of minute information, is willing to single you out to veritably persecute you, because persecution is when we're dealt differently. We have a different set of rules that then qualifies as persecution. And when this government is willing to do that, it causes us to say, wait, this is not paranoia. This is justifiable fear of our government. Small school in my hometown wanted to charter itself, submitted a 501c3 application. The application was never handled. It went on and on and on. Our office made a call, and then the person listed on the organizational chart was called in for an audit. I will tell you that we were told by the administration spokesman yesterday, Mr. Liu, Treasury Secretary, that there's absolutely no indication that this was anything political. There is absolutely no indication that it was anything but political, Mr. Liu. Regardless of what you all say down the street, understand that the American people are frightened of their government. And they also think, with respect to the idea that we're going to hold people accountable, we hear that. We're going to hold the people accountable. We're going to bring them in. We're going to look. We're going to find the facts, and then we're going to hold them accountable. The American people look with a little bit of curious disregard for those statements. And why would Americans be suspicious of the government that they won't actually do anything to the people who are involved, that they won't actually get to the bottom of it? Well, there's a track record in the last 5 years that caused the American citizens to look with disdain at any promises that there will be penalties, that the wrongdoers would be punished. Might be skeptical of whether anyone will pay any price for what has happened in the targeting of certain groups in this country by the Internal Revenue Service. It's also important that we look at other cases which have not yet been prosecuted in which wrongdoing occurred. MF Global was a commodities trading firm. John Corzine, Democrat elected official, took over that firm. It's against the law when you have your money in these trading accounts, whether it be Merrill Lynch or whoever, it's against the law to take your money out and use it for corporate governance, for corporate organizational activities. And yet John Corzine reached down into customer accounts, pulled out $1.5 billion of money from account holders and spent it trying to keep his failing organization together. His efforts failed. MF Global filed bankruptcy. That was in 2011, and still Mr. Corzine has not had to answer any questions, has been convicted of no wrongdoing, has not been brought to trial, hasn't had a grand jury paneled. Bernie Madoff, we saw him take billions from investors, and for decades the regulators had reports that he was doing it, and not one regulator has been held accountable for their oversights, for their omissions. No one has ever checked. So when we hear this administration say, trust us, we're going to get to the bottom of this IRS scandal and we're going to hold people accountable, there is in fact an anger building among the American people that says we do not think Washington will hold anyone accountable. You have the AP reporters whose phone records were gotten, not just the ones who were involved, but the broad pool of reporters. And yet nothing is happening to those in the Justice Department who did that. Benghazi is another element where we believe no one will ever be held accountable. In fact, the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, says, what does it matter? What it matters, ma'am, is that someone allowed American soldiers to be killed without reinforcements. C-130s were within flying time. Drones were there, lasers locked on to the artillery that were firing rounds into that compound, and no one says a word. And so we have the Internal Revenue Service investigating and holding audits for law-abiding citizens like this 83-year-old grandmother. Meanwhile, there are over $1 billion of unpaid taxes by federal employees. Why doesn't the Internal Revenue Service go after the federal employees who refuse to pay their own taxes? The highest profile case is Mr. Geithner, who became Treasury Secretary. And we were told that, well, he's such an important person, he can't be held to account for small actions like that. Yet one political party, one political viewpoint has been singled out by this administration in order to put the chill on people who might be involved in activities that would disagree with the government. We've seen governments like this before in American history. We've seen tyrants before. We've seen tyranny before in world history. And I think Democrats, Republicans, and Independents are going to stand up on these issues and demand accountability from Washington. I think the American people are coming together with a will and a backbone that will stand up and say, you, the people who perpetrated these evils and these crimes, will be accountable. That's what makes this country great. That's what makes this country the envy of all other nations, because we have a constitution that our founding fathers put in place, which gives the people the power. The government is working at the approval of the American people. I think the American people are coming together across racial lines, across party lines, across religious and cultural lines to say that we demand an accountability from our government officials, that we will not allow any citizen to be treated this way. The nation spoke this way when it was Richard Nixon, and I think the nation will speak this way under this administration.